The sun had barely risen over the sleepy village, painting the rooftops with streaks of gold and orange, yet the old man already sat on the worn wooden bench outside his small cottage, his hands trembling slightly as he held the frayed leash of the tiny shepherd puppy who had wandered into his life only days ago, the little creature shivering beneath the weight of a world that seemed far too cruel for such innocent eyes, and as he watched the puppy struggle to find warmth against the morning chill. Memories of his youth flooded back in vivid detail, a time when laughter had been abundant and his heart had felt light and unburdened, when he had roamed the hills freely with friends who were now long gone, swept away by time and circumstance. And yet in this quiet village, with the wind whispering through the olive trees and the scent of dew-laden grass filling his nostrils, there was a new rhythm forming, a fragile bond beginning to weave itself between the old man and this tiny shepherd, whose amber eyes seemed to hold a lifetime of silent pleas and unspoken wisdom. And every day, as he offered the puppy bits of stale bread and warm milk, he could see the flicker of trust slowly ignite, a candle in the darkness of both their lives. And the villagers, though kind, could not understand the depth of the connection, for to them it was merely a stray dog finding temporary shelter. Yet to the old man, whose children had grown distant and whose wife had passed many years before, this little puppy was a reminder that life still held fragments of beauty, that love, though fragile, could be reborn even in the most unexpected forms. And so he named the puppy Papy, a name that carried echoes of comfort and nostalgia, as though by calling him such he could tether him to the warmth of belonging that the world had so often denied him. And Papy, though cautious at first, began to follow the old man everywhere, his tiny paws patting softly on the cobblestone streets as if he too sensed the depth of this unspoken promise, a companionship that transcended words, that existed in shared glances, gentle touches, and the quiet rhythm of breathing beside a fire that crackled in the heart of the old man's modest home. And days turned into weeks, and the village slowly took notice, some smiling at the sight of the unlikely pair wandering through the market. The old man stooped with age yet upright in dignity, the puppy bounding around his feet with boundless energy, a small beacon of life that seemed to laugh in the face of the melancholy that shadowed the old man's eyes. And yet beneath the surface of this burgeoning joy there were shadows, whispers of fragility that neither could ignore. For the old man's health was failing quietly, each cough a reminder of mortality, each ache a note in the symphony of passing time, and Papy, unaware of the impending sorrow, continued to play and follow and trust, his tale a metronome of devotion that pulsed with the beat of the old man's own heart. And as autumn arrived, painting the trees with flames of amber and crimson, the old man realized that the days left to share with Papy were numbered, and he began to cherish every moment, every wag, every lick, every look that spoke louder than any words ever could. And he would sit for hours on the hillside, Papy at his feet, watching the sun sink slowly behind distant hills, feeling the bittersweet swell of happiness and grief intertwined, knowing that love was often accompanied by inevitable loss. And on one particularly cold evening, the old man wrapped Papy in a worn blanket and whispered stories of his youth, of adventures long past, of friends and family who could no longer be beside him. And Papy, sensing the weight of the words though not understanding their meaning, nestled closer, a living warmth against the chill that seeped into the old man's bones. And in that quiet communion, a bond forged stronger than any fear of the future, unbreakable even in the face of impending sorrow. And as the weeks passed, the old man grew weaker, his steps faltering, his voice softer, yet Papy remained steadfast, never leaving his side even as the villagers murmured about the old man's failing health, offering soup and blankets and well-meaning words, all of which could not replace the simple presence of the puppy who had become his heart outside of his own chest. One night, under a canopy of stars shivering in the crisp air, the old man whispered to Papy, "You have given me more than I ever deserved, little one." And Papy responded with a soft whine, nudging his head against the old man's trembling hand. And it was in that moment, a fragile bridge between life and the inevitable end, that the old man knew he had lived a lifetime of love in these short weeks with his shepherd puppy. And he drifted into sleep, never to awaken again, leaving Papy to stare at the empty side of the bed with eyes wide and filled with the incomprehensible pain of loss, his tiny body quivering not from cold but from grief. The world suddenly quieter, emptier, and yet in the stillness of the cottage, the echoes of shared laughter, of gentle steps, of soft stories whispered in the glow of the fire, lingered as if the love they had shared could not be erased by death. and Papy, with an instinct deeper than reason, refused to leave the cottage. Curling up where the old man had last lain, refusing food, refusing sleep, as though keeping vigil, a guardian of memory, a witness to the depth of emotion that had passed between them. And the villagers, noticing the unwavering loyalty of the puppy, spoke in hushed tones about the miracle of such devotion, how grief could take the shape of love, how a small animal could mirror the human heart in ways no words could capture. And for months, Papy remained by the cottage, his body growing thinner, his eyes retaining the spark of recognition and memory, until one winter morning, the villagers found him lying peacefully by the hearth, a faint smile on his little face, the spirit of the old man somehow carried in every fiber of his being. And in that quiet cinematic tableau of grief, love, and the inevitable passing of time, the story of the old man and his shepherd puppy lived on, a reminder that emotional bonds transcend life itself, that even in sorrow there is beauty, and that sometimes the purest form of love is the love that outlives us, the love that teaches us how fragile and precious every shared moment is, and that the echo of a paw step or a whispered story can linger long after hearts have ceased to beat. And the villagers, when they spoke of the tale, would tell of the little puppy who had waited faithfully for the man who had changed his life forever, and of the man who, even in his final days, had found the purest happiness he had ever known in the companionship of a small, trembling shepherd. And so the legend of their bond spread far beyond the village, inspiring others to see the depth of emotion that could exist between humans and animals, to cherish each fleeting moment with those they loved, and to understand that even in the inevitability of loss, there is meaning, there is devotion, and there is the quiet, unspoken poetry of a heart tethered to another. And thus the old man and Papy became more than a man and a dog, more than a tale of sadness. They became a symbol, a cinematic testament to the eternal dance of love, loss, loyalty, and memory, etched forever in the consciousness of all who heard their story, a story that would ripple across time and space, touching hearts, evoking tears, and reminding everyone that the deepest connections are sometimes the simplest, and sometimes the most tragic, and that life in its fleeting impermanence shines brightest in the moments of genuine affection shared between souls, human or animal. And in that understanding, the world itself seemed a little warmer, a little more compassionate, and a little more aware of the invisible threads that tie us to one another, threads that even death cannot sever, threads woven from the essence of love itself, fragile yet unbreakable, silent yet deafening in their impact. And the story of the old man and his shepherd puppy continued to live on, not in newspapers, not in books, but in the hearts of those who understood that emotional truth, that cinematic beauty of devotion, and in the quiet, lonely corners of the world, where grief and love intersect, there echoed always the soft paw steps of Papy, faithful to the end, faithful beyond reason, a living testament to the power of love, the inevitability of sorrow, and the beauty of a bond that could not be extinguished even by death itself. 09/10 9:53 a.m. Ijar Allah. Even after the passing of the old man, Papy remained in the cottage, his small body curled on the same worn rug where his master had last sat, the fire now cold and lifeless. Yet in Papy's heart the warmth lingered, an invisible presence that guided his every movement. And each morning he would sit by the empty chair, staring at the window where the old man had once gazed at the sunrise, his little paws tapping softly on the wooden floor as though calling out for the familiar voice that would never come again. And the villagers, moved by the sight of this unwavering devotion, began to leave small offerings of food and blankets outside the cottage door, hoping in some small way to ease the tiny grief-stricken heart of the shepherd puppy. Yet Papy accepted them only out of necessity, his eyes always returning to the empty space where love had been. And as the seasons changed, the village around him carried on with its daily rhythm, children playing in the dusty streets, merchants shouting over the clamor of their wares, and yet Papy remained anchored in a world where time had stopped, a world where the memory of the old man was tangible, felt in every corner, every shadow, every flicker of light that danced across the walls. And sometimes at dusk, he would hear a whisper on the wind, a faint echo of laughter or a soft voice calling his name, and though he could not understand it, he would tilt his head and listen intently, certain that somehow, somewhere, the spirit of the old man was near, and that certainty gave him both solace and an unbearable ache, a duality of love and loss that defined his every heartbeat. and the villagers often told stories of the puppy who had loved beyond reason, who had mourned with a depth no human could match, and travelers passing through would pause at the cottage, watching the tiny silhouette framed in the dying light, wondering how such loyalty could exist. And Papy, oblivious to the awe he inspired, continued his silent vigil, packing the perimeter of the yard as he had learned from the old man, sniffing the air for any sign of return, a ritual that became as natural to him as breathing, and on particularly cold nights, he would curl tightly, pressing his nose into the folds of the blanket that still smelled faintly of his master, the scent a ghostly reminder of love that had been unwavering, and yet despite the grief that shadowed him. There were moments of fleeting joy, like the first snow of winter where he would leap and bound with abandon, imagining for a heartbeat that the old man had returned to join him, or the soft bloom of spring where the flowers reminded him of the small garden he had tended alongside the old man. And in those ephemeral moments the world seemed less cruel, and life, though hollowed by absence, still carried whispers of the love that had once filled it. And as months turned into years, Papy grew older. His once boundless energy tempered by age, his steps slower, his coat duller, yet his eyes retained that spark, that unwavering devotion, that essence of the bond that death had tried but failed to sever. And in the quiet of the night, under the blanket of stars, he would lie on the hill where the old man had first found him, staring into the horizon as if seeking a glimpse of the one who had given him a life beyond mere survival. And there, in that silent communion with memory and the wind that carried echoes of the past, Papy's heart held the story of a lifetime, a cinematic tale of love, loss, and fidelity that transcended words, transcended time, and transcended the fragile barrier between species. For he had known a connection so deep that even the absence of his beloved companion could not erase it. And the villagers, now grown accustomed to the sight of the old dog lying alone on the hill, whispered of the miracle of devotion. How grief could take on the form of enduring love, how the heart could beat in tandem with memory, how the smallest creatures could teach humanity lessons about loyalty, empathy, and the impermanence of life. And travelers who heard the story would leave with tears in their eyes, carrying with them the cinematic image of a little shepherd puppy whose life had been defined by the depth of his love. And yet the narrative was far from finished, for in the final winter of Papy's long life, as the wind bit harder and the trees shed their leaves in a flurry of gold and brown, he felt the weight of age more acutely, his breathing shallow, his legs trembling, yet he remained steadfast, sitting by the old man's favorite spot, staring at the horizon as though he knew the final chapter of their story was approaching. And one morning, when the first frost kissed the ground and the village was still wrapped in the quiet of dawn, Papy closed his eyes for the last time, a soft sigh escaping him as if carrying a final message of love and remembrance. And when the villagers found him, they wept for both the puppy and the old man, realizing that in their shared lives they had witnessed the purest form of love, a cinematic, heartbreaking, transcendent connection that no words could fully capture, and they buried him gently beside the old man, marking the grave with a simple wooden cross, a testament to a story that would echo through generations, a story of loyalty, grief, and the emotional power of companionship. And in the stillness of the cemetery, the wind seemed to carry whispers of their laughter, their shared moments, the soft paw steps on cobblestones, the warmth of a hand and a nose pressed together in quiet comfort. And thus the legend of the old man and his shepherd puppy lived on, not merely in the hearts of those who knew them, but as a cinematic symbol of love that endures beyond life, a story of heartbreak and devotion intertwined, a narrative that reminded all who heard it that even in sorrow there is beauty, and that even in loss there is a legacy of love so pure that it continues to resonate, inspiring tears and empathy, a testament to the emotional depth that can exist between humans and animals. And the world in its infinite rhythm became just a little softer, a little more compassionate, because of the story of the old man and his shepherd puppy. And in that story one could see the fragility of life, the inevitability of death, and yet the eternal power of love that binds all living beings in an unbreakable cinematic embrace. 09/10 954 Amijar Allah. Years passed and the village slowly changed, new families arriving, children growing, streets reshaped. Yet the story of the old man and Papy lingered like a shadow that refused to fade. whispered by those who remembered the unwavering devotion of a tiny shepherd puppy who had loved beyond reason. And the memory of the hill where Papy had spent his final days became a quiet sanctuary for villagers and travelers alike, a place where people would bring their own pets, sit quietly, and feel the lingering echo of a bond so profound that it transcended both life and death. And in the evenings, when the sun dipped low and painted the sky with strokes of pink and gold, it was said that if one stood silently on the hilltop, one could hear the faint patter of small paws upon the ground, a ghostly reminder that love does not die, that devotion can persist beyond the fragile boundary of mortality. And storytellers, inspired by the legend, began to recount the tale of the old man and his shepherd puppy with cinematic detail, describing the first meeting on the misty hillside when the little pup had stumbled into the old man's life, trembling, lost, and alone, and how in the weeks that followed, the puppy had learned to trust, to love, and to form a bond that had carried them through the quiet joys of daily companionship and the looming shadow of inevitable separation. And in retelling the storytellers emphasized the sensory details. The scent of dew on grass, the warmth of a fire in a cold cottage, the soft sound of breathing beside a hand, the wag of a tail in the golden morning light, and through these narratives, listeners could feel the cinematic weight of every moment, as if they were walking beside the old man and Papy, experiencing both the fleeting happiness and the searing pain that defined their shared life. And poets wrote verses about the loyalty of animals, inspired by Papy, drawing parallels between human and canine hearts, illustrating the universal truth that love, once given, remains imprinted in the soul. And in schools, children were told the story as a lesson in empathy, teaching them that kindness, patience, and devotion are not limited by species, that grief is a testament to love, and that even the smallest creature can leave an indelible mark on the world. And in quiet moments, villagers would visit the old man and Papy's grave, laying fresh flowers, whispering thanks, and sitting for long stretches in contemplative silence, imagining the warmth of the fire, the little paw nudges, the soft whine of companionship, and the shared moments of joy that had defined the brief but powerful lives they had shared. And as time stretched further, artists began to paint murals in the village square, depicting the tiny shepherd puppy curled beside his master, bathed in the cinematic glow of sunrise, a visual homage to the enduring love that had captivated so many hearts. And photographers recreated scenes of the hill, the cottage, the empty bench, capturing the essence of the story with each frame, each shutter click immortalizing the tenderness, the grief, the loyalty that had defined the pair. And tourists visiting the village would leave with eyes wet and hearts full, touched by the sheer purity of devotion, often remarking how extraordinary it was that such a small life could teach lessons about love, mortality, and emotional truth. And in letters and journals, people would write of Papy, imagining how he had sensed the old man's heart slowing, how he had stayed steadfast beside him in the final moments, how he had mourned with a depth few humans could comprehend. And these words carried the cinematic rhythm of grief and love intertwined, a story not merely told but felt, absorbed into the psyche of those who experienced it. And as decades rolled on, the story became legend, retold in newspapers, local libraries, and eventually online, each version emphasizing the same universal truths: that love can exist beyond life, that loyalty has no measure, and that the emotional impact of shared companionship can ripple through time like waves across a still lake. And even as new generations arrived who had never met the old man or Papy, they too were touched, crying at the thought of a tiny shepherd puppy waiting for a man who would never return. And in the cinematic lens of memory, the village itself seemed transformed, imbued with the warmth and sorrow of a story that reminded everyone that even fleeting connections could leave eternal marks. And the seasons turned as they always do, winter giving way to spring, spring to summer, summer to autumn. And yet the memory of the old man and his shepherd puppy remained untouched by time, as if the world had collectively agreed to honor their bond, a silent testament to the power of emotional storytelling. And in quiet corners of homes, people would place photos of their own pets beside candlelight, telling them the story of Papy, teaching them about fidelity, empathy, and the bittersweet nature of love. And somewhere, perhaps in dreams, children imagined the tiny amber eyes staring up with trust, the soft fur brushing against a hand, the warmth of companionship, and the painful sweetness of inevitable loss. And thus the cinematic tale continued to resonate, a river of emotion flowing endlessly, carrying with it the sorrow, the beauty, and the eternal echo of an old man and his shepherd puppy who had, for a brief moment in time, shown the world the true depth of love, devotion, and grief. And as the wind blew through the village streets, through the hill, through the silent cottage, it seemed to whisper their names, to remind all who listened that life is fragile, that love is powerful, that grief is meaningful, and that even the smallest heart can leave the largest impression. And this story, told without pause, without space, without break, continued to unfold in the minds and hearts of everyone who heard it. A cinematic, unbroken testament to the power of emotional connection, the tragedy of loss, and the transcendent beauty of a shepherd puppy's love for the man who had saved him. And in that endless echo, Papy's devotion became immortal. And the old man's heart lived on through every tear, every memory, and every quiet sigh of those who understood the cinematic, tragic, and deeply emotional truth of their shared journey. 09/10 954 Imijar. As the years unfolded, the story of the old man and his shepherd puppy became woven into the very fabric of the village, their tale told at family gatherings in classrooms, whispered among lovers on quiet evenings, and recounted by travelers who had come seeking the hilltop where Papy had waited faithfully for the man who had given him life. And though the village had grown and changed, the essence of their bond remained, a quiet reminder that love can leave footprints far deeper than time itself. And people began to erect a small memorial at the edge of the hill, a simple stone marker etched with their names, a place where one could sit and feel the lingering presence of devotion. And children would bring their own pets, placing flowers or small treats, imagining the amber eyes of Papy, the gentle hands of the old man, and learning in the process that empathy, patience, and loyalty are lessons that transcend generations. And poets continue to write, capturing the cinematic grandeur of their story, painting vivid pictures of mornings filled with golden sunlight, of quiet evenings by a dying fire, of tiny paws pattering across cobblestones in anticipation. And each verse, each painting, each story carried with it the weight of grief and the beauty of love, a duality that made the narrative both heartbreaking and profoundly inspiring. And in homes far beyond the village, people would read the story aloud, tears sliding down cheeks, hearts swelling, feeling as if they themselves had lived the brief but extraordinary life of the shepherd puppy, walking beside him as he followed his master, sensing the looming shadow of mortality, yet reveling in every small moment of joy and warmth. And as winter descended one year, blanketing the hills in frost and snow, villagers would gather at the memorial, leaving small candles that flickered in the crisp air, a cinematic display of remembrance, of devotion that had endured beyond the fragile boundary of life. Papy's story became a symbol, a beacon for those who sought to understand the depth of emotional connection possible between humans and animals, a living testament that grief, though painful, is the echo of love, and love, though fleeting, leaves an indelible mark upon the heart. And travelers, writers, and artists who encountered the story would return to their own lives inspired, seeking to love more deeply, to cherish companionship, and to recognize that every small act of kindness, every gentle touch, every moment of shared presence carries significance far beyond what the eye can see. And in the quiet of the village at dusk, the wind would sweep through the hills and whisper of a tiny shepherd puppy who had waited, of an old man who had given him the gift of love, and the echo of their bond would ripple through the air, carrying cinematic weight, the depth of emotion palpable to anyone who paused and listened. And as time pressed onward, the story took on a life of its own, migrating from oral tradition to written word, from village tales to literary works, inspiring cinematic adaptations, illustrations, and short films, each capturing the essence of devotion, grief, and love that had defined their days together. And in each retelling, the emotional impact remained undiminished, for the power of a heart tethered to another heart, human or animal, resonates eternally, and villagers would still visit the cottage where the fire once crackled, imagining Papy's little form curled by the rug, the warmth of the old man's hand stroking his fur, and they could feel the cinematic heartbeat of their story, the rhythm of love and loss, of loyalty and grief, coursing through the space as if time itself had paused to honor the bond. And in the quiet evenings, some claimed to hear soft paw steps on the wooden floor, a spectral echo of devotion, and children, captivated by the tale, would sit quietly, imagining the amber eyes looking up with trust. The tiny body trembling in excitement or fear, the warmth of a hand and the comfort of a shared blanket, and in their imaginations, the story lived on, vibrant, heart-wrenching, cinematic, a continuous flow of emotion that seemed impossible to contain. Yet it did not need containment, for the story itself was a living entity, carried in memory, in tears and laughter and quiet sighs of empathy. And over time, as new generations were born, they too heard of the old man and Papy. Learning that the smallest beings could teach the greatest lessons, that love could endure beyond life, that grief was the echo of devotion, and that every life, no matter how brief, could leave a cinematic legacy that touched hearts across time and space. And even decades later, visitors to the Hilltop Memorial would feel the pulse of emotion, a quiet cinematic heartbeat, a connection to a story of love and loss that transcended mortality. And in those moments they understood, as all who had listened or read or imagined understood, that the old man and his shepherd puppy had taught the world an unspoken truth. That love, even when accompanied by inevitable sorrow, is the most profound gift one can experience, and that loyalty, even in the face of absence and death, can shine brighter than any fleeting joy. And so the cinematic, unbroken narrative of their life continued, flowing endlessly through memory, imagination, and story, carrying with it tears, smiles, and the eternal echo of a tiny puppy's devotion to the man who had given him everything, a testament to the fragility and beauty of life and the enduring power of emotional connection that can move, inspire, and transform everyone who encounters it. 09/10/955 Imijar Allah. Even as decades passed, the memory of the old man and Papy continued to breathe life into the village, whispered in hushed tones by elders sitting on benches outside sunlit cottages, shared with laughter and tears by children who had never known them, yet felt their story as if it were their own, and the hilltop where Papy had kept vigil became more than a mere landscape. It became a sacred space where the wind seemed to carry the soft echoes of paw steps, the gentle rustle of leaves mingling with imagined whispers of the old man's voice, a cinematic reminder that love once given imprints itself onto the very air. And in the cottage where the fire had once crackled, a small empty room preserved with care by villagers became a shrine of sorts, housing a few worn blankets, a frayed leash, and a tiny bowl that had once held the shepherd puppy's milk, objects imbued with silent stories of devotion. And travelers visiting from distant lands would sit in that quiet room, imagining the tiny trembling body of Papy, the warmth of the old man's hand brushing fur, the serene glow of firelight illuminating the bond that had been formed in the shadow of loneliness and impermanence. And in these moments, visitors felt a profound cinematic resonance, as though time had collapsed, and they could sense the heartbeat of love that had once filled the space, the tremor of grief that followed the old man's passing, and the enduring presence of loyalty in its purest form. And over the years, artists, poets, and writers continued to create works inspired by the story, capturing in words and images the emotional spectrum of devotion and loss, portraying the small puppy's amber eyes, the tremble of his paws in the rain, the quiet moments of companionship by the fire, the gentle nuzzles, the joyful leaps in the morning light, and the quiet grief that followed the inevitable separation. And each creation carried a cinematic weight, painting a vivid tableau that conveyed more than mere narrative. It conveyed feeling, the raw emotional depth of a bond that had changed lives, hearts, and perceptions of love and loyalty. And in the village square, a mural was painted on the side of an old building, spanning its entire width, depicting the old man with Papy nestled at his feet, the golden sun casting long shadows, the mist curling over the hill, and villagers and visitors alike would stand before it in awe, eyes welling with tears, sensing the story's unbroken emotional thread. And in classrooms, teachers would tell the tale, guiding students to reflect on empathy, compassion, and the quiet heroism of everyday